Hello friends and welcome back. So in this session we are going to cover the interview questions and answers related with the WebLogic server deployment. Okay. So what is application deployment in WebLogic? So application deployment is a very simple terms where we place the application in the WebLogic server so that it should be accessible to the end users or to the outer world. Simple definition, right? Because when we develop the application or when the developers develop the application and when we hand over it for the end users, so that the application should be accessible for the end user. So you will get the application, you will deploy it in the WebLogic server. After deployment, the applications will be available for the end users. Okay, and we deploy the applications on the managed servers. Okay, for example, we have a domain where we have an uh, four managed servers, maybe one, two, three, four, and all four are in a cluster. And when we deploy any of the application, for example, we have a banking dot var. Okay, when we deploy the application, we select a target. So if you want to deploy it on in all the servers which is part of a cluster, so during the deployment we select the target as cluster. So when you select the target as cluster, it will automatically deploy to each and every server. And for any reasons, if you want to deploy any of the application to a particular managed server, then in target you can select that particular managed server instead of the cluster. So that application will be deployed to the specific managed server, right? So definition is very straightforward. To make the application accessible to the end users or to the outer worlds, we deploy the application in the WebLogic server. What are the different ways of to deploy applications in WebLogic? What are the common deployment method? The question is same, how we deploy the applications in the WebLogic server. Okay, so we have a two straightforward ways that we mostly use. Okay, the very first is the admin console. Admin console. You log into admin console, okay, and go to the deployment section. In the deployment section, you go for and click for the install. So install option is there for installation of the new application. You can select the application and then you get the multiple option during the deployment, and then we deploy the application. So that means first way is you can deploy with the help of admin console. Second thing, if you want to prefer certain kind of automation, you don't want to go with the admin console, so you can go for the WLST, WebLogic scripting tool. Okay, so with the help of WebLogic scripting tool, we can also deploy the application. So these are the two main preferred method for deployment of the application in the WebLogic server. What type of archive files can be deployed in WebLogic? Okay, so whenever the code is developed by the developer, okay, so there is specific format of packaging the files. Okay, it should not be packed in a random order. Okay, there are multiple subfolders and there are multiple different kind of a files. There are standard. Okay, you can say there is a standard of the files. Okay, when we create the different code files. Okay, and that files we get in the form of archive file. It's something like a zip file when the code is ready. So that archive file you will get from the developer, and that we deploy in the WebLogic server. So we have a three major different kind of a var files. Okay, specifically if I talk about the total number of archive tags, we have a four mainly. Okay, so let me list out: dot var, dot ear, dot jar, and dot rar. Okay, so this var is for the web applications, ER is for enterprise applications, jar is for library files, and rar is for connectors. Okay, so now what is the purpose of each and every file? Simple. If you have a web application which is going to be accessed from the web server or maybe from the web browser by the end user, that means you have a web application. So whenever you have a web application, then you will get in the form of .var file. For example, banking.var. Okay, you deploy the var file on the your WebLogic server, and which you can access from the browser. Okay, and the flow would be simple. User will access the application from the browser. It will go to your web server. From web server, it will go to your app server, like the WebLogic here, where we have deployed the var file. Okay, second is the enterprise file. Now what is enterprise? Okay, so when we develop the code, okay, so we have a two kind of applications. The first is the web application. This we have seen here, var file. And second is the business logic, which is the actual code which is getting executed at the server end. right? So that means business logic is something which is used by your front end. So for example, if I talk about a banking transaction, you logged into your banking website, you access some banking website from your browser, xyzbank.com, okay, and you initiated the money transfer. So what you did, you access the website on the browser, right? You logged in with your username and password, then you navigated to your money transfer section, and then you have initiated the money transfer. So now two things here. The very first thing, the web application that is displayed in front of you in the browser, this is a web application, right? And second, when you hit the submit button to initiate the transfer, then what will happen? There is a business logic need to be executed on the server side, right? Business logic means it will check for the money in your account. If the money that you are transferring is sufficient in your account or not, then it will contact the target account. It could be in the different bank, okay. And once it is validated, then it will deduct the money from your account and it will credit it to the target account. So that means some business logic is getting executed here, and for that we write to some code, and this code is going to execute on your server side, right? So we have a two kind of application. So if you have a business logic also in your application, not only the web applications, okay, then we go for the enterprise application, that is called EAR. So this EAR is a combination of web application. It is a combination of the advanced code, advanced Java code, where the business logic is written, right? So that means in a EAR file, if you open the EAR file, okay, you may see some WAR file as well, right? Because EAR is a combination of web applications along with the business logic. So this is called the enterprise applications. JAR file is simple library file. So there would be a certain code that is common across the multiple applications. You may be using multiple applications, but some code is common. So instead of writing the same code again and again, or instead of zipping the same code multiple times inside multiple applications, what we do, we deploy the jar files as a jar file, which is a common code, libraries. Okay, it is simple, the concept of a library. We have a different books in the libraries. We borrow the book from the libraries, and then we hand it over to the library. And then if some other person need the book, then again that person will borrow from the library and again return back. Similarly, if we have a code that is utilized multiple times in a multiple application, we deploy it as a jar file, as a library. Okay, and that can be utilized by any of the application if you have multiple applications. RAR is for the connector. So connector means if your WebLogic need the connectivity some external systems, for example, Tuxedo. Okay, so these kind of a connector, so this is a legacy, you can say a legacy feature, okay, where if you want to connect with some third party system, so for that connectors are provided. You need a mediator connector in between, that connector installed in the form of RAR, and with the help of that we can create the connections with the third party applications. So these are the different format of different kind of archive files that we get in the WebLogic server for the deployment. Now, what is the difference between jar, var, and EAR file? This I have already explained in detail, right? And jar file is a library file, which is a common code. Var is a web application. EAR is an enterprise application. So this will contain your var files, right? And second, it contains the business logic as well. So multiple file, multiple codes are there. Like in the EAR file, you will see the var file. You will see multiple jar file, multiple class file, and there are multiple other files as well, right? So this is again an important question from the interview perspective. What kind of a different file that we deploy? What is the difference between jar file and EAR file, var file and EAR file? Okay. What are the different deployment mode in WebLogic? Explain stage, no stage, and external stage deployment. The question is same. If the first part is that it is expecting you to tell the different type of staging mode in the deployment. So we have a three mode: stage, no stage, external stage. Okay. So that means when we deploy the application, in WebLogic server, okay, then how my application, for example, I am deploying banking.var. So how this file, my code file, will be available to my managed servers. I have four managed servers: MS1, MS2, MS3, MS4, which is part of a cluster, right? So when I am deploying this file, so this file need to be available to my each and every managed server, correct? So how this file will be available for my each and every managed server is decided by these different modes. Now, what is the meaning of each? Stage, no stage, and external stage. So let me explain you. Very first thing is stage. Okay. So when we deploy the application in stage mode, so what happened that whenever I am deploying the application, for example, my application is banking.var file. I have initiated a deployment. I go, okay, from the admin console, I have selected my application and I clicked on the deploy. Right. So after that, if the mode is stage, this var file will be copied by the admin server to each and every managed server staging directory. So this location I have taken from my local system for deployment. And when I initiated the deployment, your admin server will copy this file to each and every managed server staging directory. And where is the staging directory? It's straightforward. You go to your domain. Inside domain servers, inside servers, you will have a folder for each and every server, MS1, MS2, MS3, MS4. Go inside a particular folder, like suppose in managed server 1, MS1. So inside MS1, you will have a folder called stage folder. So this file by admin server will be copied to the stage folder of each and every managed server. This is called the stage mode of deployment. What is no stage? It is again very clear. No stage. That means no need to stage the file. It will be accessible from a single location. So that means in no stage, admin server will not copy this file to each and every managed server staging directory. That is called no stage, right? So that means in that case, whatever the location that you have selected for the deployment, application will be accessible from that particular location. Okay, so maybe I have an NFS shared file system, and in somewhere in my shared file system, I have placed my code file banking.var. So during deployment, I will select this location for my application. So if the mode is no stage, your each managed server will look for this directory for the application. It will not copy to each and every server staging directory. This is called a no stage. Now third is external stage. So in external stage, it is something like stage, but difference is that in stage, what I said, when we deploy the application, your admin server automatically copy the file to each and every server. In external stage, your file has to be for in each and every managed server, but admin server will not copy. You have to manually copy that. Okay, for example, in each and every server, if suppose that all four servers are running in four different virtual machines in the horizontal cluster, then in each and every server, you have a directory called app and then sales, or maybe something like banking folder. Inside that, I have a banking.var file like this location. So when I am doing the deployment, so I need to copy my code manually on each and every server in this location, and then I will initiate the deployment. So the difference is with the stage is we are copying the file manually. However, in the staging mode, it copy the file automatically for you. Right. So these are the three different modes of deployment, and this is again a very hot question specifically for the interview perspective. What is the default deployment mode in WebLogic? So we have learned we have a three mode: stage, no stage, and external stage. The default mode is stage. That means your application will automatically copy by your admin server to each and every managed server's staging directory. That means domain, inside your domain, servers, your managed server name, and then stage folder. So here the file will be copied by your admin server automatically for each and every managed server. Okay, the next question would be, can applications be deployed on the admin server? What are the pros and cons? Okay, so when we deploy the application, what we've learned so far, even we have a discussion on this as well in the previous sessions. So we deploy applications on the managed servers, right? For example, this is our domain and I have an admin server, and then I have four managed server, MS1, MS2, MS3, MS4, which is part of a cluster. So when we deploy the application, what we do, we target it to the cluster so that it can be deployed to each and every managed servers, or we can deploy to the individual server as well. We do not deploy it to the admin server, which is a recommended option, or the recommended way. You should not deploy any application to the admin server. But technically, it is feasible. If you want to deploy your application on admin server, that is also possible. This is not recommended, but it is possible. You can deploy your application on admin server as well. Now when we say what are the pros and cons, okay, so now each and every domain will have only one admin server, okay, and this admin server is dedicated for the admin console, right? We have an admin console that we access from the browser. So this admin console applications is deployed on your admin server. So this is for the centralized management of your domain. Okay, so that means this admin server is used specifically for the admin console for internal purpose, right? By the WebLogic server. Second thing, this is a single point of failure because every domain has only one admin server, right? And if you deploy your application here, and if this server get crash, your application will not be accessible, right? So this is always recommended to deploy your application only on the managed servers and not on the admin server. Okay. So as I said, if you want, you can deploy. And what is the situation where you can deploy the application to admin server? For example, for your learning purpose, okay, learning purpose or maybe some demo purpose, okay, you have created one domain and where you have one admin server. So in that case, you can deploy the application to admin server because you are just doing it for your own learning and practice purpose, right? So because if you are going to create managed server, it is going to take the resources of your system because every managed server need the heap size which is reserved from the RAM. It will take your CPU and core time, right? So if you are just doing for learning purpose, okay, so no need to create managed servers. You can deploy the application on admin server as well in that situation. Okay. What is auto deployment and how it can be enabled or disabled? So auto deployment we have learned in the domain section as well. This auto deployment is a feature where your application is automatically deployed to the WebLogic server. You don't need to go to the admin console, or you don't need to use the WLST for manual deployment. Okay, the feature is inside the domain, you will have a folder called auto deploy. Okay, and if you want to deploy any application, you can just copy the file, your code file inside the auto deploy folder. For example, like banking.var. As soon as you copy inside this folder auto deploy, your file will automatically picked up from here and WebLogic will deploy it automatically. But this feature, which is called the auto deployment, is applicable only for the development mode of domain. So we have learned we have a two mode, development mode and production mode, right? So in production mode, it is disabled. So even you copy the file in the auto deploy folder, it will not work. If you are in a development mode of domain, then this feature is going to work for you, right? Because in development mode or maybe in the development environment, the code is getting changed very frequently by the developers. So to save the time, okay, we have this feature where they can just copy the file to the auto deploy directory and it will automatically get deployed. Okay, how to enable or disable? Again, it depends on which mode you have. If you want to go for the auto deploy, then you have to set the production mode as false, which you see here. Okay, this production mode as of now, which is if you click on the domain name, so inside the domain name, you will see it on the right hand side and same option in the traditional admin console as well. So production mode, if you set it as a false, that means auto deploy is now enabled because the mode of the domain is now development. If you enable it, then this auto deploy is not going to work. What is redeployment or update and how is an application redeployed? So redeployment or update simple means you have some new code file, there is a change in the code and then you got a new file that you need to replace with the old file. Okay, for example, we have the banking application banking.var which is deployed in our WebLogic server. Now tomorrow you get a new code file banking.var which has some enhancement in the code which you need to deploy. Okay, so you need to update the application. You will get an option called update in the WebLogic server. So you click on update, select the location of this file and then click on deploy, or maybe you get the option update. So it will replace the old file with the new files. Okay, and this is called the redeployment or update option. But in this situation, during the deployment, your application may not be accessible during the time, or you can say the total time it is taken for the redeployment, right? Because if I have a banking.application file, var file, which I have deployed in my 4 managed servers, MS1, 2, 3, and 4. So when I'm redeploying this, I'm updating this in a cluster. That means this new code file will start initializing on each and every managed server at the same time. So if suppose that the deployment or update of the new file took 5 minutes, if it is a very large, or maybe it took 2 minutes. So during that period, when it is replacing the old file with new file, your application will suffer the downtime. And to avoid this downtime, we have one more option that I will explain in the next slide, which is called the side by side deployment. And in the documentation, you will see it as a production redeployment. If you go to the Oracle documentation, that you will see the term production redeployment. Now, what is the benefit of production redeployment, which is also called a side-by-side deployment? For example, I have an application banking.var is deployed, which is up and running in my cluster. Now, tomorrow I got a new version of my application that I want to deploy. Okay, but I don't want to go with the downtime. If I will straightforward initiate the update, then during the deployment of new code file, when it is replacing the old one, maybe for 2 minutes or maybe for 5 minutes, it is a downtime for my application. I don't want to go with a downtime. So for that, we have a production redeployment, which is also called side-by-side deployment. In this case, we can deploy two versions of the same application in parallel. For example, banking.var. This is with the version 1. It is deployed and up and running. Now you got a new version of the code with version v2. Okay, this version is deployed in the code. We have a code, some code file, where inside the code file we mention this version. Okay, so this you can deploy. So this will get deployed in parallel of this one. Okay, so that means two versions of the application will be active at the same time. So as soon as the new application is deployed and is active state, all the new requests to a WebLogic server will go to this particular new application, and all the old sessions, those were connected to the old application, will not get closed. They will be closed when the request is completed and the session is closed, and then all the new requests will go to the new code. So by this way, we can deploy two versions of the same file to avoid any downtime. This is called the production redeployment or side-by-side deployment. What is an exploded form of deployment and what are its benefit? Okay, so we have learned that when we deploy the applications, okay, like for example, we have a var file, we have er file, or we have a jar file, or we have a rar file. Okay, so we have the different ways of deployment. If you don't want to deploy in the archive format, then we have one format also called the exploded. So what I told you in this particular discussion, developers create or develop the code. Okay, and there is some specifications of the directories and files that they create in the code file. There will be a directory, there would be files, a directory, there would be files, and then they zip it in the var file format, or maybe er file format, jar file format, or rar file format. Okay, so suppose this directory or the file is very big. So this mostly exploded form we use for the var file web applications. If this is a very big file, very large code file, there are a lot of files are there, multiple big files are there, it is not feasible to zip them in a particular format, which may degrade the performance and create multiple problems. So you can directly deploy this directory as well instead of doing it in zip form. Okay, whatever the parent directory, for example, I have parent directory sales. Inside this parent sales directory, I have this complete folder structure. So during the deployment, you can select this sales folder, and this code will be deployed in the form of exploded form. Okay, this is open directory. Just like we have a directories and files in our local system, you can anytime you can go to this directory and you can navigate to all the files, right? If you have a var file, EAR file that is deployed, you cannot go to that one until unless you are going to download in your local system, then going to unzip. Okay, so but if you have an exploded form, you can easily navigate to the directory structure wherever you have the applications are deployed. Benefit is that you can dynamically change the code. Okay, for example, this is a directory structure where you have multiple files are there inside your code. If some of the file is changed, for example, there is a HTML file that has been changed, so you can take just that particular HTML file and copy inside this directory, and it will get reflected in your application live without any redeployment. So this is one of the benefit of the exploded form of deployment. Okay, the next question could be, what is the difference between web.xml and weblogic.xml? Okay, so these files are part of your code, the application we deploy in the WebLogic server. It could be your var file, it could be your EAR file, okay, it could be a jar file. Okay, so in this file, all these files, what I said earlier, that this is some specific directory structure is there. We have some specific directories, then you have a specific content, code files inside the directories. There is a structure of the code. Okay, that we zip in the var ear or jar file. So web.xml and weblogic.xml both are part of this code files. But what is the difference between them, weblogic.xml and web.xml? Okay, so it's a very straightforward. Web.xml is a specific file which contain the descriptors for standard Java Enterprise editions. Okay, that means when we develop the code using the Java Enterprise edition specifications, okay, so this contain multiple descriptors in the XML file. Okay, that is work on any application server not specific to WebLogic. So that means this web.xml file contains some descriptors which can be feasible, or which can be, you can say, can be deployed across any of the application server from the compatibility perspective. It's not about WebLogic. Maybe you are going for a WebSphere. So WebSphere is again an Java based application server from the IBM. Maybe you are going for the JBoss application server. So if you have some code file where you have a web.xml file which contains some deployment descriptors which is based on some Java Enterprise Edition specifications, so this will be feasible everywhere. Okay, either in JBoss, WebSphere, anywhere. And let me give you some example for that. For example, for web application, we define the session timeout. Okay, so this is a session timeout descriptor that we define in the web.xml file. Okay, apart from that, if you want to define some welcome file, the default welcome file for a web application, so we can define in the welcome file list. And this is the syntax, welcome file, and the name of the file, whatever you want it to be displayed as a welcome file, initial file. Okay, so this is the descriptor for the welcome file. So these are the two descriptors, and similarly we have a multiple descriptors that developers define in the code. Okay, and this is the web.xml. Now when we talk about weblogic.xml, so this weblogic.xml, as the name also specify, this contain the descriptors which only work in the WebLogic. That means used for WebLogic tuning and integration. So that means this file contain the descriptors which is specific to the WebLogic server. However, the web.xml is contain the descriptors which is a standard Java Enterprise Edition descriptors and can be used across any of the application server, not specific to WebLogic. Okay, so these are the certain WebLogic server specific descriptors, like you can define the context root of your application, the way you access the application in the browser, right? And then you may have a session persistent. So we can configure the session persistent in the WebLogic server. So this is the descriptor for that, persistent store type replicated. So this we configure when we enable the session replication. Right, so these are two examples of weblogic.xml descriptor. So in a straightforward way, weblogic.xml contain the descriptor which is specific to the WebLogic server, but web.xml contain the standard Java Enterprise Edition descriptors that can be feasible to be deployed across any of the Java based application server like WebSphere and JBoss. What is a deployment file and what is the purpose of it? Okay, so when we deploy an application, for example, banking dot var file. Okay, so when we deploy a file in a particular environment, so this file may contain some information which is specific to the environments. Okay, there would be some parameters that is applicable for development environment, some parameters applicable for your testing environment, some for quality environment, some for pre-prod, and some for prod. So that means this file may have certain parameters which is specific dependent on the environment that you are going to, where you are going to deploy this application. Okay, let us take an example of session timeout parameter only. Session timeout parameter for web application. Okay, so in development, testing, and quality in other environments, you may want some higher session timeout like 120 seconds. But when you are going to deploy this application in the production environment, you will need the shorter session timeout time. For example, 30 seconds. In development, testing, quality environments, you may want to access the application with some different context. Like in the development environment, you want to access the application with the context slash dev. In testing, you want to access the application as test. Quality, you want to access as QA. But in a production, you wanted to access it as a prod, right? So that means different context root, different session timeout settings. So what I mean to say here, in the code file, you may have certain descriptors, certain values, which is specific to different environments. Okay, so in that case, for example, if you have developed this code, okay, now you have deployed this code in development environment. If you are going to deploy same code in testing environment, you need to change the code. Again, the same code is going to deploy in the quality environment. in the pre-prod environment, in the production environment, every time you need to change this var file. Okay, so that is not feasible. So to avoid this, we have a deployment file. So what is deployment file? Deployment file is a file which contain the multiple values or descriptors that you can change in the code on the fly dynamically. You don't need to change the code in the code file. Instead of that, you can define that values or parameters or descriptors in a separate deployment file, which is some file with the extension of .xml. Okay, and you can define these values in the XML file. And when you deploy your application, with to application, you can specify a deployment file. For example, my application is banking.var. Okay, and I have created a deployment file with the name of development.xml. So this is my deployment file for my uh, development environment. Similarly, for testing environment, I may have testing.xml, my deployment file. So when I will deploy this file in the development environment, I will give the deployment plan as development.xml. Same file I can deploy in my testing environment, and I will give the deployment plan as test.xml. So by this way, I don't need to change the code file every time. I need to specify the parameters, dynamic parameters, which is environment specific in the deployment plan file, and it will overwrite the parameters which is there inside the code file. Okay, so this is a deployment file, and what is the purpose of your deployment file? What is the purpose of deploying a file as a library, and how can application be deployed as a library? So this we have discussed earlier as well. We have a multiple kind of a files that we deploy: var file, EAR file, jar file, and rar file. Okay, so jar file, what we have learned, this is are the shared libraries, shared libraries, or you can specify as shared code. Right, we have some code that is common across the multiple application. For example, I have a payment application, payment module. So I will create a payment module in a separate file, and I will integrate it by multiple applications wherever I need to integrate the payment facilities. Okay, so this is called the shared file. Okay, so this shared file we can deploy from the console, or either you can add it in the class path. You can add in the class path of your server. Okay, so to add in the class path, either you can edit your environmental files, or the best way or simplest way is inside the domain folder you will have a folder called lib. You can take this jar file and copy inside the lib folder and start your services. Okay, and this file will automatically add in your class path once it is copied in the library directory. What is JNDI, Java Naming Directory Interface? So JNDI, which is Java Naming Directory Interface, it is a lookup service. Now, what is the meaning of lookup service? It's very simple. If I will give you one example of data source. Okay, we have a data source in the WebLogic, and why we use a data source? To make a connectivity with the database. Okay, I have my application which is deployed on my managed server. If this application need the connectivity with the database, it will contact the data source, and data source will contact the database. This is the actual flow, right? But how this application will connect to the data source? And I may have the multiple data source 1, data source 2, data source 3, data source 4. I can have a multiple data source in my environment, right? And here I may have the multiple applications, app1, app2, app3, app4. Okay, if this app1 application need to contact ds1, this application 2 need to contact ds3, right? So how these applications going to identify which data source I need to connect to borrow the connection from the database? I need something, right? So that my application can understand to which data source I need to connect for the database connections. So to make this connectivity where your application can look up for the data source, okay, we have the JNDI name, JNDI, which is a lookup service. So when we create the data source, okay, if you have some idea of data source, and if you have created the data source, then you will recall that at a one place when we are configuring the data source, we specify the JNDI name. Okay, for example, if you have defined the JNDI name as JNDI slash my data source, my sorry, my data source. What is happening? My data source. This is the name that I have given for JNDI. Okay, so when I will develop my code, where I need the connectivity with the database. So there I will define this same GNDI name. And by this GNDI name, my application will contact a specific data source. So that means each and every data source will have a unique GNDI. And with the help of this GNDI, your application can connect to the database, or you can say to connect with the data source. Similarly, whatever the resources that we define in the WebLogic server, for example, in the JMS, when we create a queue or when we create a topic, so with respect to queue and topic, we also specify the GNDI name. So if my application need the connectivity with the JMS, where it want to store some message in a particular queue or maybe in a particular topic, so the respective JNDI of the queue or the respective JNDI of the topic, I need to define in my code. So with the help of this particular JNDI, my application can contact the respective queue or respective topic. Okay, so this is called the JNDI, and that's why it is called the lookup service, because your application is used to look up the WebLogic resources. Okay, your application code. Okay, whenever your application code executes something which need the access to the WebLogic resources, so this JNDI is work as a lookup service which help you to look up the different resources that you have configured in the WebLogic server. For example, the data source, for example, the queue, topic, or many other configurations as well. How can the cache be cleared in WebLogic server? This is very generic question, okay, and then it's a practical thing as well. Many times you will, in a support, you will see that you need to start the servers and we need to clean the cache before we are going to start the servers. Okay, so in WebLogic server, we have to delete two directories to clear the cache when you are going to clear before starting the servers. And the directories names are cache and temp. These are the two directories, cache and TMP, that we delete to clear the cache for each and every server. So cache and TMP will be applicable for each server, like for admin server and for each and every managed server as well. Okay. And what is the location of cache and temp DIRs? It is inside your domain, servers, and the name of your server. Inside that, you will have a folder called cache. Along with that, you will have a folder called temp. Okay. And then we have a multiple other folders as well, like logs, and then security, and then few more. So here, if someone is telling you to clear the cache or how we clear the cache, so you can go inside the staging directory of your server, and inside the staging directory of your server, you can delete the cache and TMP folder, but do not delete it if your servers are running. Okay, you have to stop your server before you are going to clear the cache, or before you're going to delete the cache and TMP directory, and when it is deleted, then you can restart your servers. Why it is necessary to clear the cache in WebLogic, but why it is necessary? I know that how to clear the cache, and someone is telling you, okay, go please clear the cache before you start the services. Okay, so but why it is mandatory? So what is cache? Cache is used to increase the performance of your application. So whenever your services are started, we have the managed server, and here we have deployed the multiple applications and multiple resources are targeted, right? So when we start the services, there are a lot of content that is get cache for increasing the performance of your applications. Okay, in the cache folder and in the temp folder. Okay, so now whenever we do some new deployment, for example, you have changed your code. Okay, we have deployed the new code file. Maybe you have configured some new resources, some new data sources, you have done a lot of different new configurations. Okay, so in multiple cases it is happened that instead of taking the new values, WebLogic server may refer to this cache, and this cache contain the old values. It will not take the new values. Okay, so that's why it is multiple time it is recommended before starting the services, you should clear the temp and cache, so that the new values will get reflected in your applications. So these are the multiple important questions, okay, that is specifically related to the deployment of applications in the WebLogic server.